right, so we give praise and esteem and honor to the Most High Yah name of Yahushua HaMashiach this day. Let's get to John chapter 5 and verse 39. So, search the scriptures, for in them you think you have eternal life, and they which testify of me. And you will not come to me that you might have life. Receive my honor, and by know you that you have not the love of Allah in you. I come in my Abba's name, you receive me not. But another shall come in his own name, him you will receive. How can you believe which receive honor one of another? And seek not the honor that comes from Elohim only. Do not think that I will accuse you. The hour there is one that accused you, even Moses, in whom you trust. Had you believed Moses, you would have believed me, for he wrote it me. But if you believe not his writings, how shall you believe my words? Let's go over to Proverbs 14 and 11. That page is not in this book. The house of the wicked shall be overthrown. The tabernacle of the upright shall flourish. So let's take a trip back to Ezekiel 37, about verse 15. What want verse 15? Well, I know I ran down some of that stuff, but you kind of glossed it. We don't really want verse 15, but we will pick it up about verse 21. About verse 21, Ezekiel 37 and 21. And it says, and say unto them, thus saith Yahuwah Elohim, behold, I will take the children of Yasharal from among the heathen, whether they be gone, and will gather them on every side and bring them into their own land. And I will make them one nation in the land upon the mountains of Yasharal. One king shall be king to them all, and they shall be no more two nations, neither shall they be divided into two kingdoms anymore at all. Now, we already started off on the split in 1 Kings 11 for context purposes, but as we're looking at not being divided into a kingdom at all, I want you to come to Songs of Solomon, chapter 1. Matter of fact, before we go to Songs of Solomon, chapter 1, let me keep going so I can tie all this stuff in together. Come back to Ezekiel 37 and 22, and that way I don't have to double back. I can just do it all at one time. Ezekiel 37:22. And I will make them one nation in the land upon the mountains of Yasharal. One king shall be king to them. Already read. We're in verse 23. Neither shall they defile themselves anymore with their idols, nor with their detestable things, nor with any of their transgressions, but I will save them out of all their dwelling places where they have sinned, and will cleanse them. So shall they be my people, and I will be their Elohim. And David my servant shall be king over them, and they shall have one shepherd, and they shall also walk in my judgments and observe my statutes and do them. So come to Ecclesiastes chapter 12. And from Ecclesiastes 12 and 9, you can get to Numbers chapter 27. I think about verse 17. So notice that he said that there'll be one shepherd. Let's get that word for shepherd. It should be Ra'ah, my memory serves me correctly, but I could be mistaken. There we go. Thought I was overlooking it. And I was correct. The word is Ra'ah for shepherd. It's the one who clearly, also another word for a special friend or to associate with. But the shepherd, the herdsman, is Rosh, Ayin, and Hay. And then you can sit back and look at it, behold, know the highest, or behold, know Yahusha, know the chief, however you want to look at it. But the shepherd is going to do what? He's going to lead you into the highest. That's why he says he's going to lead you in a place where you can graze. But nevertheless, Ecclesiastes 12 and 9, he said, moreover, because the preacher was wise, he still taught the people knowledge. Yea, he gave good heed and sought out and set in order many proverbs. Now, we went over this in the past, so he taught the people knowledge. He obeyed. So therefore, he was able to search out to cause the dark sayings to be understood. The preacher sought to find out acceptable words, that which was written was upright, even words of truth. The words of the wise are as goads and as nails fastened by the master of assemblies, which are given from one shepherd. So let's take a trip back to Numbers 27. They're given from one shepherd. Notice again that he said that there'll be one shepherd unto the house of Yasharal. Just one. And it's not David. I know some people look at it and they see that. They forget the promise that was made to David that a man would come from his lineage. Not that David himself would do it. Never understood how individuals took that from that. But that's neither here nor there. Numbers chapter 27. Verse 17, if you would, but we'll pick it up at verse 15. Numbers 27 and 15. Moses spake unto Yahuwah, saying, let Yahuwah, Elohim of the Ruachs of all flesh, set a man over the congregation, which may go out before them, and which may go in before them, and which may lead them out and bring them in, that the congregation of Yahuwah be not as sheep with no shepherd, so that they wouldn't be as someone who could not lead them to the Father when we look at Ra'ah and what that means, because it's behold, you get to know the highest. You know from John 6 and 44 that he said everyone will be taught of Elohim, and everyone who comes unto him will come unto the Father. This is why this is very important in regards to the Son. But let's go back to John chapter 10 and the statement that the Lord made. Matter of fact, before we go to John 10, let's take a trip to Ezekiel 34. We just went over Ezekiel 34 not too long ago, but we'll rehash it yet again. Ezekiel 34 and 11, and then John chapter 10. Shalom, man. But thus saith Yahuwah Elohim, behold, I, even I, will both search out my sheep and seek them out, as the shepherd seek out his flock in the day that he is among his sheep that are scattered. Remember when we discussed that, we looked at that verse in Matthew 9 where he said he was moved with compassion because the people were as sheep who had no shepherd. And if a sheep don't have a shepherd, that means they don't have a guide. And if they don't have a guide, that means they don't have a resting place. So that's why that is important. And notice, and everybody knows Psalms 23. So you say, Yahuwah is my shepherd, I shall not want. But nevertheless, he says, so I will seek out my sheep, and I will deliver them out of the places where they have been scattered in the cloudy and dark day. And I will bring them out from the people and gather them from the countries, and will bring them to their own land and feed them upon the mountains of Yasharal by the rivers and in all the inhabited places of the country. So let's pause. He said that he will feed them upon the mountains. Do any of you know what he means when he said he'll feed them upon the mountains, of what this is representative of? Anyone of you aware? So let's take a look at something in Psalms chapter 24. Said he'll feed you upon the mountains. Let me get the man's words correct. He'll feed you upon the mountains. And then he also said that, and upon the mountains of Yasharal, by the rivers. So let's take a look at something in Psalms 24, from Psalms 24 to Revelation 22, and see what he's giving you an inkling to. What is he pointing you to? What is he showing you? Psalms chapter 24. We go pick it up at verse 1. If you recall, we went over this very, very long time ago, so I can't even say recall, because now that I think about it, that was at least a year and some change ago, maybe two. But that word for mountain or hill is har, hay, and rosh. So keep that in mind. That's the word that's used for mountain most of the time is har, hay, and rosh. So behold the highest. When you see mountains mentioned in the text, it's referring to the government or the kingdom for the most part. When you see high mountains and things of that nature referred to in a lot of different locations. The earth is Yahuwah's and the fullness thereof, the world and they that dwell therein. For he hath founded it upon the seas and established it upon the floods. Who shall ascend into the hill of Yahuwah? Who shall stand in his Kadash place? He that have clean hands and a pure heart. Remember what it said, that nobody's coming in. He's going to cleanse everybody. Nobody's going to dwell there with the detestable things, idols, no things of that nature. Going back again to the point that we must be born again, because he said you got to be born of the water and the ruach. So you have to wash your heart of all the things that we have gravitated to and latched onto in this deceitful and horrible world that we're present with. Who have not lifted up his soul unto vanity, nor sworn deceitfully, he shall receive the blessing from Yahuwah and righteousness from the Elohim of his salvation. We've already talked about what that blessing was. You receive the Ruach. That's the blessing of Yahuwah. This is the generation of them that seek him, that seek your face, that seek your face, O Jacob, Selah. Lift up your heads, O gates. Be you lift up, you everlasting doors, that the Malak of esteem shall come in. Who is the Malak of esteem? Yahuwah, strong and mighty. Yahuwah, mighty in battle. Lift up your heads, O you gates, even lift them up, you everlasting doors, and Malak of esteem shall come in. Notice what he said. Who is the Malak of esteem? Yahuwah of hosts. He is the Malak of esteem. Selah. So look at that, right? You everlasting doors, lift them up so he can enter in. And we kind of talked about that the other day, that he said he'll come to the door and knock. And whoever who opens unto him, he will sit down and sup with him. A lot of people, when that word comes, they don't open their heart up to allow him to enter in because he seeks for a place to dwell. That's why he said that if you come to a person's house and they don't receive you, to wipe the dust up off your feet as a testimony against them. Because if they choose not to open their door to Yahuwah, you can't force them to do it. Let them on about their business. But we was looking at it in his Kadash hill, into the hill of Yahuwah. So that is the mountains. And he said it's the mountains by the rivers where you will feed at. Come on back to Revelation 22:1, from Revelation 22:1 to John chapter 10. Revelation 22:1 to John chapter 10. He showed me a pure river of water of life, clear as crystal, proceeding out of the throne of Elohim and of the Lamb, and in the midst of the street of it. And on the either side of the river was there the tree of life, which bare 12 manners of fruits, and yielded the fruit every month, and the leaves of the tree were for the healing of the nations. So what does that take us back to what we were discussing also in regards to the topic that we're talking about? Because remember, the tabernacle of the upright shall flourish, so they will bud and will bring forth fruit. And we were talking about the difference between the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and the tree of life. Notice that the tree of life is what you're feeding on, and the rivers and the mountain of Yahuwah. Because when you're dwelling in the mountain of Yahuwah, that is what's there, a pure water of crystal, a river of life, and a tree that produced fruit that you may partake in and live, because it's the doctrine of everlasting. This is where you'll sit back and you'll feed on with your Elohim. This is why your detestable things, this is why all your idols and everything you had going on has to be purged. Remember what we discussed in regards to what we've seen in the law in Genesis chapter 3 pertaining to the tree of life. He said we got to keep this from them, because he said now they're like unto us, and if they take therefore they will live forever. He's not going to allow you to have knowledge of evil and the ability to do evil because you know what evil is, and or participating in evil and dwell with him. So these things have to be, because he's going to end up consuming you. But nevertheless, back to John chapter 10. Well, to John chapter 10, not back to, pardon me. John 10:1, I believe, is what I desire, but I may or may not. John 10:1 is sufficient. Truly, truly, I say unto you, he that enter not by the door into the sheepfold, but climb up some other way, the same is a thief and a robber. But he that enter in by the door is the shepherd of the sheep. To him the porter open, and the sheep hear his voice, and he call his own sheep by name and lead them out. And when he put forth his own sheep, he go before them, and the sheep follow him, for they know his voice. Now, why would they know his voice? Because it says, behold, we look at Ra, Rosh, Ayin, and Hey. You can look at it as behold, know the highest. Well, to know the highest, you have to know his word. If you know his word, you know his voice. See, and the book of Isaiah, I want to say in the 26th chapter, there's a statement that comes from Isaiah in regards to speaking in regards to the people was concerned, that many lords had dominion over us, but we would only make mention of the name of Yahuwah. So there's a lot of people who have dominion over this people in the natural as far as governments are concerned. But then also, as we take into account what people are doing today, they're worshiping Saturnalia. Most don't know that they're worshiping Saturnalia. Some are worshiping Tammuz. Some are worshiping Nimrod. Most people, unbeknownst to them, the depths of who and why they're actually doing what they're doing. See, most of us feel like, people know. And most of the part, yeah, people know, okay, it's not in the script. But they don't really know who they're giving obeisances to. They don't really know who they're giving honor and esteem to. You understand? So when you turn around and you look at that, what is happening? Because they don't know the shepherd's voice, they're liable to follow anyone's voice. Now, that's no different than most people who say, okay, we Hebrews, this, that, there, and the third. When you know the voice of the Son of the living Elohim, therefore you know the voice of his Abba. And when you know his voice, you're going to follow that. Irregardless of what other people are talking about, it don't make no difference. Because you could say this and you could say that and you could say whatever you want, but you have to know his voice. You're going to know his word. And remember when we talked about that in Kings, it said his voice was still. It's a calming influence. Very, very different. Nevertheless, let's continue. The parable spake Yahushua unto them, but they understood not which things they were, which he spake unto them. Then said Yahushua unto them again, truly, truly, I say unto you, I am the door of the sheep. All that ever came before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not hear them. I am the door. By me, if any man enter in, he shall be saved and shall go in and out and find pasture. Now, that's what we come back to Ezekiel 34. That's what we saw in Numbers 27 that Moses prayed for the people. And that was pretty much what you got and gathered from Ecclesiastes chapter 12 and then back to Ezekiel 37, because he said there would be one shepherd. So it's only one, matter of fact, pause. Hebrews chapter 3. It's only one voice that we're supposed to be hearing. It's only one voice that we're supposed to be hearing. And here that voice is supposed to lead us to the place where we can rest at. That place where we're seeking to go rest at. You'll be feeding upon the mountains that are by the rivers. Because remember that he said that he would make Jerusalem as the Garden of Eden. You have to understand that that's your hope, that's your promise. This is an eternal location. He's seeking to take Jerusalem and make it like the paradise of Elohim in the beginning. This is why in Revelation chapter 2, Yahushua said, if you overcome, he'll give you the tree of life, which is in the midst of the paradise of Elohim. Nevertheless, Hebrews chapter 3 and verse 7. Hebrews chapter 3 and verse 7. He say, wherefore, as the Ruach HaKodesh say, today, if you will hear his voice, harden not your hearts as in the provocation and the day of temptation in the wilderness. When your fathers tempted me and proved me and saw my works 40 years, wherefore I was grieved with that generation and said, they do always err in their heart. They have not known my ways. Now let's go back to Psalms 95, where this comes from. Because I was thinking it had a particular statement out of there, and it didn't have the statement that I desired. It had the first part, but not the second. Come over here to Psalms 95. Psalms 95 and 3. Psalms 95 and 3. Listen to what he says. He says, for Yahuwah is a great Elohim and a great king above all gods. In his hand are the deep places of the earth. The strength of the hills is his also. Now let's look at deep places, considering what we discussed about his moving upon the face of the deep in Genesis about a week or so ago, or maybe 2 weeks ago, however long ago it was. Now, when we look at deep places, it's a range, it's a space, it's a field. The word is Mekar. You have Meme, you have Kot, you have Kuf, and you have Rosh. So when we sit back and we look at that, and we'll take that final from that, or we even sit back and look at it as we'll take Kuf and say light. Take that Rosh and take it to Yahusha and sit back and see how the blood separates you to the light of Yahusha. Shalom, man, or the light of Elohim. Because he said he has these deep places. Reason why I would look at it in that fashion is because we see that the Ruach of Elohim hovered upon the earth, was void and without form, and over the deep. And then he said, let there be light, and there was life. Now, this is what he says, is that in his hand are the deep places of the earth, and in the strength of the hills is his also. So when we look at the word that's used there for hills, it is the same word, which is har. So not only does he have the power of the grave, but he has the power of rulership, of government That's what you have to understand. That's why you have to hear his voice. In order to dwell in that place of government or to come up out of that grave to get that light, to be separated unto him, you have to hear. Nevertheless, he said, and the sea is his, and he made it, and his hands formed the dry land. Oh, come, let us worship and bow down. Let us kneel before you who are our maker. For he is our Elohim, and we are the people of his pasture and the sheep of his hand. Today, if you will hear his voice. Notice again, let's read that again. For he is our Elohim, and we are the people of his pasture and the sheep of his hand. Today, if you will hear his voice. Now let's take a look at something back in Ezekiel 34. Because he said, we the sheep, the people of his pasture and the sheep of his hand. Now look at something that what he says in regards to this here, right? What verse do I care to pick up from? Well, number one, we can pick it up at verse 21. Well, let's pick it up at verse 14. I'll move my way around. Ezekiel 37 and 14. I'll move my way around. He said, I will feed them in a good pasture upon the high mountains of Yasharal shall their fold be. And there shall they lie in a good fold and in a fat pasture, and they shall feed upon the mountains of Yasharal. Just bear with me because it's going to translate over to chapter 38. I will feed my flock and I will cause them to lay down, saith Yahuwah Elohim. Now let's drop down to about verse 20. Ezekiel 37 and 20. Therefore, thus saith Yahuwah Elohim unto them, behold, I, even I, will judge between the fat cattle and between the lean cattle, because you have thrust with the side and with shoulder and pushed all the disease with your horns till you have scattered them abroad. When you look at horns, that's somebody who has the ability to rule. So when he's looking at scattering, he's talking about the priests. Of course, if you think New Testament, you're going to say scribes and Pharisees, but it's the priests because he's talking about the shepherds. They're scattering the people. Well, how are they scattering the people? With bad teachings, by strengthening men in their wickedness, by prophesying words that come from their own heart and not from the heart of Yahuwah. I heard a woman today calling herself a prophetess, going off on a dude, this, that, that, and the third. And it seems like she was trying to convince herself that Yahuwah's son versus convincing us, because she mentioned it a multitude of times before I was disgusted and couldn't hear no more. Nevertheless, therefore will I save my flock, and they shall no more be a prey, and I will judge between cattle and cattle, and I will set up one shepherd over them, and he shall feed them, even my servant David, he shall feed them, and he shall be their shepherd. And I, Yahuwah, will be their Elohim, and my servant David, a prince among them. I, Yahuwah, have spoken it. So again, Ezekiel, shalom, man. So again, Ezekiel is making that point. One shepherd, he's the one who's going to feed him. We read that in Ecclesiastes chapter 12, that the preacher was wise, so he sought up acceptable words and still taught the people knowledge. And he says, as a master, but said, the words of the wise are as golds, as the nails fastened by the master of assembly, as coming from one shepherd. One shepherd. Now let's take a look at something of what the Apostle Peter made mention in that regard. 1 Peter chapter 5. From 1 Peter chapter 5. Maybe 1 Peter chapter 2, but 1 Peter chapter 5 indubitably. 1 Peter chapter 5 and verse 1. Of course, you know that Peter said, if you don't know, now you know. And you know, Peter said in 1 Peter chapter 2 that we were returned unto the shepherd and bishop of our souls. Because you got to come get the word from him. And that's what a lot of people don't realize. A lot of people are trying to minimalize and disrespect and say a lot of things about Yahusha, but one thing for certain and two things for sure. How do you expect to get into the sheepfold if you don't get brought in by the shepherd? And since I said that, we'll go to Matthew chapter 25 right behind this. 1 Peter chapter 5 and verse 1. The elders which are among you I exhort, whom also an elder, and a witness of the sufferings of a Mashal, and also a partaker of the esteem that shall be revealed. Feed the flock of Elohim which is among you, taking the oversight thereof, not by constraint, but willingly, not for filthy lucre, but of a ready mind. Remember, so now he's talking to people who teach the word. He's talking to men who say that they are pastors. See, you can say you're an elder and not be a pastor. Because elder, shepherd, bishop, all the same position. And of course, 1 Timothy chapter 3, along with many other things in the text, Old Testament wise, and of course with the Gospels to put that together to show you that Yahusha is the example for the qualifications that exist for a pastor in 1 Timothy chapter 3 and Titus chapter 1. But that's neither here nor there for right now. Because, that's real big amongst brews. Niggas saying they elders, this, that, then the third. So you could be an elder just because you're older, but that doesn't mean you're a pastor. And just because you're older does not mean you're qualified to dispense the word of Elohim. If you recall, when we were looking at things according to the due order, it said that they ordained elders in every city. That means the apostles appointed men to be pastors in every city. That means these elders were taught the gospel. What can you teach the people if you don't have the gospel? Because this is what Yahuwah has ordained. This is not what man has ordained, because you got to get the word from one shepherd. That's why you take that back to the apostles when they sat down with him in Luke. They got the word from that one shepherd, and then they went out and dispensed that word. No matter who they went and taught the gospel to, it still came from that one shepherd, period. It has to be Yahushua. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about that, because you can't be saved without him. Nevertheless, he said, neither being as lords over Elohim's heritage, but being as samples to the flock. And when the chief shepherd shall appear, you shall receive a crown of esteem that shall not fade away. Notice they say the chief shepherd, because anybody who's a pastor will be considered a shepherd, the overseer. You watch over the flock the same way a shepherd watches over the flock. You have to tend to it. You have to nurture it, and all these other things of that nature. But Lord, it was outside. I was going out to 1 Peter chapter 5. I cannot. Y'all willing to come on? I know I said 1 Peter chapter 2. That's neither here nor there. Come on back to Ezekiel 34. Y'all willing to come back? Ezekiel 37. Oh, Matthew 25. Appreciate you. Matthew chapter 25. Matthew chapter 25, verse 31. Definitely. There's one chief shepherd. And you remember, right? He told his apostles in the 17th chapter of Luke that they were just unprofitable servants doing it is what their duty to do. The same way when that Roman centurion came to the Lord and said, hey, you ain't even got to step through my door because I'm a man under authority. I tell a man to go and he go. I tell a man to do this and he do it. That's what a lot of individuals, that's how you know a lot of individuals ain't sent by the Lord, because if he's sending you to do a job, you're just an employee. You're just an employee. You're not really of that great of honor and esteem when you look at it. You work for someone and you have a job to do. And on top of that, you don't even get no gain from your job, at least not gain from men. You're going to get gain from your employer. That's why he say, whosoever receive whomsoever I send, receive me. Because if you say you receive my employees, then you receive me, which means you receive my employer, which is his Ab in heaven. But I told you that before. A lot of dudes pick up the word for different reasons, man. A lot of dudes got low self-esteem. They damaged. They dysfunctional. They hurt on the inside. They got a lot of other things. So they're looking to compensate for the lack within themselves by being seen as some great and mighty man with the word, versus you have a job to do. You have a job to do, period. And the job is to feed the people the word that they might be saved. That's it. When you look in the text, man, and you look at the apostles and you look at the prophets that came before them, they weren't, I'm talking about the righteous ones, man, as far as prophets is concerned. They were not concerned with the things that we're concerned with now. That just shows you how spiritually dysfunctional we are as a whole, because we're concerned about things of no consequence. You know what I'm saying? And the things how dudes will try to take verses to construct to fit their framework, especially when they're beefing with another person or battling with somebody else's doctrine. Like, who cares? At the end of the day, who cares? How does this benefit the word and way of salvation of Yahuwah? How do you get a benefit from that? That an individual can draw closer to the essence of their creator, which is to receive the Ruach. How am I closer to living forever based off this conversation? You know what I'm saying? Based off this conversation. If we're dealing with a Mashal, we're supposed to be dealing with the things in heaven now, not the things of this life and this earth. You know what I'm saying? To a extent, doesn't mean you toss that stuff to the side, but you got to have understand nuance. Nevertheless, Matthew 25 and 31. When the Son of Man shall come in his esteem, and all the Kadash Malachim with him, then shall he sit upon a throne of his esteem. And before him shall be gathered all nations, and he shall separate them one from another, as the shepherd divided his sheep from the goats. And he shall set his sheep on the right hand and the goats on the left. Now come back to Ezekiel 34, because now he's sitting there telling you, because not only do you sit back and you look at it, the shepherd has to bring the sheep in. So if he's separating the sheep from the goats, he's separating those who heard and those who didn't. Because remember, faith come by hearing, and hearing come by the word. And the just or the sadak, the righteous, are going to live by their faith, period. You're going to live by your hope and expectation in your Elohim. That's what you're going to live by. They told you the same analogy, no different when your parents promised you money for good grades. You had an expectation. That's a promise made. You did certain things according to what they considered to be just. By the faith that you had, they will supply you with the reward upon completion of the task. So you had to endure. You couldn't see it, you couldn't taste it, but yet you endured until you can receive it. That's why he makes that statement that, tribulation work experience, and experience work patience, and patience hope, and hope make not ashamed. Nevertheless, Ezekiel 34, verse 25, and I will make with them a covenant of shalom, and will cause the evil beasts to cease out of the land, and they shall dwell safety in the wilderness and sleep in the woods. I want you to keep that in mind. And I will make them in the places round about my hill a blessing, and will cause the shower to come down in this season, and there shall be showers of blessing. And the tree of the field shall yield her fruit, and the earth shall yield her increase, and they shall be safe in their land, and they shall know that I am Yahuwah, when I have broken the bands of their yoke, and deliver them out of the hand of those that serve themselves of them. They shall no more be a prey to the heathen, neither shall the beasts of the land devour them, but they shall be dwell safely, and none shall make them afraid. And I will raise up for them a plan of renown. They shall no more be consumed with hunger in the land, neither shall they bear the shame of the heathen anymore. Thus shall they know that I, Yahuwah their Elohim, am with them, that they, even the house of Yasharal, are my people, saith Yahuwah Elohim. And you, my flock, the flock of my pasture, are men, and I am your Elohim, saith Yahuwah Elohim. So why is that important when he say the flock of his pasture are men? Because if the flock of his pasture are men, and it goes back to what we read in Psalms chapter 95, and I will reiterate that back to you real quick, because if the flock of, because a lot of dudes say that, women don't mean nothing, but see, they don't really want to take an account of what he's saying, because he told you to come and worship and bow down and kneel before Yahuwah. He's our Elohim. We're the people of this pasture, the sheep of his hand. Today, if you will hear his voice. So if you say that you're of the sheep of his pasture, then you would need to be bowing down and worshiping this man accordingly. And you would need to be listening to him and obeying him and doing exactly what he told you to do. Not only with yourself, but with your household. See, you can't run around and say, oh, see, we the men, we the sheep of his pasture, but then you're going to have to do what the sheep of his pasture were told to do. And the sheep of his pasture were told to come bow down and kneel and worship before Yahuwah. They were also told to harden not their hearts, but to hear his voice. So if you hear his voice, then you would follow him, which means you would have to function as a sheep of his pasture. Meaning, if the sheep of his pasture are men, then you would have to operate as a man of Elohim will operate, or you do not have the right nor honor to even dare utter the words that you're the sheep of his pasture or the sheep of his flock, because you would be a liar. Because he said the sheep of his pasture hear his voice. You hear his voice, and you're going to live according to your faith, period. You know what I'm saying? And that means you would have to do the things that the sheep of his pasture do. Abraham would be considered to be a sheep of his pasture. And he said, Abraham believed in Yahuwah and counted it for righteousness. He said, if you be Abraham's seed, you would do the works of Abraham. So if you don't know what the works of Abraham are, then you might need to revisit that. But we could tell you one, he said, I know that he'll do justice and judgment, and that he'll teach his household the way of Yahuwah. If you heard his voice, then you would teach your household the way of Yahuwah, because that's what the law say to do. That's what the law say to do. So that means your household will know what the law says to do and what the law says not to do. And if they don't know, then you couldn't say that you were the sheep of his pasture, because you hadn't done your job, because you didn't hear his voice. You harden your heart. Nevertheless, back to Ezekiel chapter 37. I want y'all to keep that in mind about the dwelling safely and dwelling in the woods and a covenant of peace and never being afraid. Just want y'all to keep that in the forefront of your mind. We're back to Ezekiel chapter 37. I stopped at verse 23. Well, I stopped at 24, but I'm going to pick 23. Because he said that you won't devour yourselves with any of your idols or detestable things or any of your transgressions, and that he will cleanse you. I want you to take a look at Philippians chapter 3. This fourth is being cleansed. Because remember, we read how he said that baptism doesn't put off the filthiness of the flesh, but give you a good conscience towards Elohim. So in order to do that, we need to put something off and put something on, if you would. Philippians chapter 3. If I can get there, we might can make a move. And I have arrived. Philippians 3 and 17. Brethren, be followers together of me, and mark them which walk so as you have us for an ensample. For many walk, of whom I've told you often, and I tell you even weeping, that they are enemies of the stake of a Mashal, whose end is destruction, whose Elohim is their belly, whose esteem is in their shame, who mind earthly things. For our conduct is in heaven, for hence we look for the Savior, the Lord Yahushua HaMashiach, who shall change our vile body, that it may be fashioned like unto his glorious body, according to the working whereby he is even able to subdue all things unto himself. If you recall, in First Corinthians, chapter 15, talks about how he subdued things under his foot. Last enemy to be subdued is death, and then he'll deliver all things up to his Father. So I want you to understand something. The same way that Yahushua subdued death by his sacrifice and his resurrection is the same way that if he dwells in you, that he could subdue your flesh and subdue all your affections and lust and desires and everything that is contrary to the way of Elohim. Now, I mention this stuff all the time, even more so recently, especially from the time that we started talking about masculine and feminine women and all of those things of that nature. But this goes both sides, male or female. We're not being trained properly. This is why I was telling Marquise earlier today. A lot of brews get upset, they get offended because people tell them Merry Christmas and things of that nature. But you have to understand where you dwell. The overwhelming sentiment across everyone in this land is that everyone celebrates Christmas. Why would there be a reason in these people's mind not to think otherwise? Because the amount of people who don't pales in comparison to the amount of people who do. So that means that this is a culture of which people were raised to think and operate in a certain fashion. Why did I mention that? Because before you even get to operating as a man of Elohim or a woman of Elohim, you're not even taught to serve Elohim and Ruach and truth to begin with. You're not even taught that off the top. That's not even being instructed to you off the top. So then how would you even know how to be instructed to be a woman of God, period? How would you know to be instructed to be a man of God, period? You would have to unlearn all the folly and expectations and thought and notions that you had in your head of how things are supposed to go and how people are supposed to operate. You'd have to unlearn all of that because most of what we have acquired is in gross contradiction, diametrically opposed, if you will, to what Yahuwah is ordained for individuals to function as. You know what I'm saying? That's just the reality of the whole situation. We could try to spin it, make it whatever how we want to try to make ourselves feel, but in reality, you're not taught to do that. You're not taught to understand what it is to be a man who is a servant of the living Elohim and conduct yourself accordingly. As a woman, you're not taught what it is to be a woman of Elohim and to conduct yourself accordingly. Before you even start to talking about interacting with a man or a man interacting with a woman. So these things can't never come into play. So then children are reproduced and the cycle will continue because we have, for lack of a better term, we have ungodly unbelievers because you haven't been shown anything different. So this is why it's imperative of why you have to be born again. Because when you're born again, that means you've taken up the state. And because you've taken up that state, you have crucified your flesh, your affections, and your desires because you understand that the flesh is deceitful. This is what happened to Eve in the garden to begin with. Satan came with the deception, and her flesh pushed the deception because the flesh deceived her by telling her, you know what? He kind of right. It do kind of look like it'll make you wise. It do kind of look like it'll do this here. Because the book tell you that the law of Yahuwah make wise the simple. So it wasn't a lie per se, what he told, but it was deceptive of the end result that would occur. And that's what made him a liar. See, that's the best lie to tell, is you put a little bit of truth with it, because you're not going to, it's easier for you to digest. But the main thing is that flesh will deceive you and tell you that wrong is right and right is wrong, because the flesh seeks to please and gratify itself. That's all the flesh seeks to do, is gratify itself. That's why I say those that are in the flesh cannot please Elohim, and they cannot be subject to the Torah Elohim. They can never come under to the submission and obedience of the Torah, because the Torah is going to mute your desires that are contrary to Elohim's will. So we have to understand that. You've been taught in a society to be an individual who seeks gratification, attention, and means of aggrandizing yourself, pleasing yourself, seeking after what you want. So when it comes down to that has to be reined in, and that you have to stand up and rein that in as an individual and as a man who say, okay, I'm the pastor of my flock of men. Which means that if the pastor of his flock are men, then he's expecting his men to hear his voice and to reign. This is one of the reasons why he said that a man who doesn't have control over his house can't watch over the house of Elohim. If you can't moderate your wife and your children, how are you going to moderate these people? You're not going to be able to do it, because you can't even get her in line. She does what she wants to do, and you don't have a problem with that. Your children do what they want to do. They don't have a problem with that. Again, that goes back to the statement made the other day, like, that's not really a woman's job to rein in them children to a certain extent, because it's only for so long, especially for male children, that they're going to really have that strong level of respect for her. The respect for the father is drastically different. It's drastically different because of the authority and the wisdom and understanding that he can impart. So the respect is going to be different. It's not that the mother is not going to be respected, but the respect for the father, if he is a man, is going to be different than the respect that's imparted to the mother. The respect that's imparted to the mother is drastically different. It's a different type of thing. Especially they taught properly. You taught properly, you never disrespect your mom. You know what I'm saying? I told you about that years ago. We frowned on that type of behavior. We definitely respect dudes who didn't respect their mama. Niggas like, what's wrong with you? How could you disrespect your mama? How could you disrespect your grandmama? What's wrong with you? But on the reverse side, for the most part, and not to say every young black male does it, but you taught if your daddy didn't do certain things, that it didn't matter if you disrespected him. And it don't matter what he did or what he didn't do. Same for your mom, because there's a lot of deadbeat mothers out here too. That's a conversation black people don't like to have, but it's a lot of them out here. I don't care what they done. You don't disrespect them, because that say more about you than it say about them. You know what I'm saying? If they did things that were inappropriate, dysfunctional, destructive, or whatever the case may be, then that's on them. But I don't give you license to disrespect them. You know what I'm saying? That means you haven't handled what you got going on within your own self, and you're trying to channel that somewhere else. And you're saying you are serving the Elohim. You're supposed to have long suffering and compassion. As the book say, who can have compassion on them that are ignorant and out of the way? So you would already have to know, knowing the understanding that we have arrived at now, that if they didn't raise us in the fear and admonition of Elohim, then you should know that they're ignorant and they have no idea what they're participating in regards to juxtaposition to the word. Because, of course, we know it's a lot of stuff people do. They know what they're doing. But when you compare that to the word, a lot of people don't really know the level of offense that they're at. You have to understand that, because they don't know. Where did they get it from? If you know you didn't come, if you know that you are their offspring and you're serving Yahuwah and they're not, that means they never heard it. Which means they didn't come up in that type of culture and that type of upbringing. So you have to understand, they don't really know no better. Because if they did, they may not do the things or seek after the things that they seek after. That's where wisdom and understanding come in at. That doesn't mean that I condone or I'm going to accept or turn my head from what you got going on, but I can be able to be a little bit more long suffering and able to patience to be able to suffer you in your folly. Nevertheless, Ezekiel 37, I think we're in verse 25. They shall dwell in the land that I have given unto Jacob my servant, wherein your fathers have dwelt. And they shall dwell therein, even they and their children and their children's children. Well, let me say this correctly. And they shall dwell there, even they and their son's son, forever. And my servant David shall be a prince forever. Moreover, I will make a covenant of shalom with them. It shall be an everlasting covenant with them. I will place them and multiply them. I will set my sanctuary in the midst of them forevermore. Now, of course, when we were in Ezekiel chapter 40, we were looking at the things of forth as the measurement of his sanctuary. Of course, we've already went through and ascertained that his sanctuary is him. But nevertheless, we'll grab this word for sanctuary. And he said he'll set it in the midst. So go ahead and grab your Zephaniah chapter 3, probably about verse 1. And since he said he'll set his sanctuary in the midst. Of course, you know that should be Mikdash, as forth as sanctuary is concerned, Meme, Kuf, Dalet, and Shan. And we can sit back and see how the I don't want to use that. How the blood of the sacrifice paired us to light. That's what that sanctuary is, because that's what you offered in the sanctuary. But let's take a look at Zephaniah chapter 3. Because he said he'll set it in the midst. And then from that, I think it's Matthew 18. But if it's not Matthew 18, I just mention the verses. I don't believe it is Matthew 18. Praise the Lord. Zephaniah chapter 3. Matthew 18, probably about verse 10. If I can get to Zephaniah, maybe we can do something. But I'm skipping over it for some reason. And I don't know why. Zephaniah chapter 3 and verse 1. I'm grabbing a little bit too much, but it's okay. Woe to her that is filthy and polluted, to the oppressing city. She obeyed not the voice. She received not correction. She trusted not in Yahuwah. She drew not to her Elohim. Of course, he's referring to Jerusalem. Her princes within her are ravening lions. Her judges are evening wolves. They gnaw not the bones till the morrow. Her prophets are light and treacherous persons. Her priests have polluted the sanctuary. They have done violence to Torah. Again, this is dealing with the priest slaughtering the Mashal. The just Yahuwah is in the midst thereof. He will not do iniquity. Every morning do he bring his judgment to light. He fail not, but the unjust know no shame. If you recall, we went over this very, very long time ago. That's why you always see Yahushua in the midst of people, right there in the middle. That's why you always seen that. Because he's the judge. He don't do no iniquity. Now let's take a look at something in Matthew chapter 18, about verse 10. Verse 15, actually. We got to get, actually, 18, because we don't need 15. Matthew 18 and 18. He said, truly I say unto you, whatsoever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatsoever you shall loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. Again, I say unto you that if two of you shall agree on earth as touching anything that they shall ask, it shall be done for them of my Abba, which is in Shamahim. For where two or three are gathered together in my name, there am I in the midst of them. Because the just Yahuwah is in the midst. And if we're gathered together in the name of Yahushua, remember, the chief shepherd gives the word to the one shepherd. So if two or three are gathered together, this is why I never understood Bruce who always scream about, oh, I fellowship by myself, this, that, there, and the third. Well, guess what? Yahuwah can never be there because you ain't following what the word say. Because the law itself say 2 or 3 witnesses, a matter is established. Why you think Yahushua just turned around and told you if 2 or 3 are gathered together in his name, he in the midst? Because if 2 or 3 are gathered together, then they bear witness of him. And if they're bearing witness of him, then he would be there with them. He can't be there with you if you're the only witness. Because that's not sufficient according to Torah. But dudes don't even understand that or see that. That's why he tell you that. This is why Paul wrote this in Hebrews chapter 10, to forsake not to gather. Let's just grab it real quick. Hebrews chapter 10. This is why he tell you that. Because 2 or 3 got to be gathered together for him to be in the midst. They got to be gathered together because that's what the law say. You know what I'm saying? You can let people tell you, oh, I do it by myself. I don't need nobody. Keep rolling with that. Keep rolling with that and see that where that gets you. That's not my personal opinion. That's what the law says. You take that up with Yahuwah because I ain't going to go back and forth with your body. You can do what you want to do. Hebrew chapter 10, man, by verse 19. Having therefore, brethren, boldness to enter into the Kadash by the blood of Yahushua, by a new and living way, which he have consecrated for us through the veil, that is to say, his flesh, and having a high priest over the house of Elohim, let us draw near with a true heart and full assurance of faith, having our hearts sprinkled from an evil conscience and our bodies washed with pure water. Let us hold fast the profession of our faith without wavering, for he is faithful that promised. And let us consider one another to provoke unto love and unto good works, not forsaking the assembling of ourselves together as the manner of some is, but exhorting one another, and so much the more as you see the day approaching. And what do we see in Zephaniah chapter 3? Let me just reread that to you in verse 5 one more time. Let me just reread that to you. Because he said, you see the day approaching. And what did he tell you? The just who is in the midst, he don't do no iniquity, and every morning do he bring his judgment to light, and he fails not. So the day is approaching. All you got to understand is when 2 or 3 are gathered in his name, Yahushua right there. Meaning Yahuwah is right there. He's right there. That's why it is important. That's why it's important to know him. Because he seeks to be in the midst of all those who fear him, trust him, and serve him. That's his desire. But back to Ezekiel 38. And that's why he has set his sanctuary in the midst. Of course, you know that we read that in Revelation 20:21. That the Lamb and Yahuwah are the temple of it. It's right there in the midst, in the middle. Nevertheless, verse 27 of Ezekiel 37. My tabernacle shall also be with them. Yea, I will be their Elohim, and they shall be my people. And the heathen shall know that I, Yahuwah, do sanctify Yasharal. My sanctuary shall be in the midst of them forevermore. So, excuse me. You think they're not going to know? See, let's take a look at something in Revelation chapter 11. You think they're not going to know? Oh, they're going to know. They're going to know. They're going to know. They ain't got no choice but to know. And they're going to like it too. Revelation chapter 11, right? By verse 15. Revelation 11 and 15. The seventh Malachim sounded. There were great voices in Shamahim saying, the kingdoms of this world have become the kingdoms of Yahuwah and of his Mashal, and he shall reign forever and ever. And the 24 elders which sat before Elohim on their seats fell upon their faces and worshiped Elohim, saying, we give thanks, O Yahuwah Elohim Almighty, which are, was, and are to come, because you've taken to you great power and have reigned. And the nations were angry, and your wrath is come, and the time of the dead, that they should be judged, and that you should give reward unto your servants, the prophets, and to the saints, and to them that fear your name, small and great, and should destroy them which destroy the earth. Now, a lot of people look at that when he say destroy the earth, and they'll look at it in this regard, environmentally. But people are destroying the earth because they're destroying it with idolatry. They're destroying it with fornication. They're destroying it with adultery. They're destroying it with idolatry. They're destroying it with thievery. They're destroying it with oppression. See, let's take a look at something in Genesis chapter 6. And we'll see that in the beginning, right here in the law. Genesis chapter 6. I pick it up at verse 1. I ain't gonna bother you. Genesis 6. We finna wind down. Because I know even though it's these people holiday, they get right back to business tomorrow. And we right back to business as if nothing occurred. We gotta get this money back. And it came to pass when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them, that the sons of Elohim saw the daughters of men, that they were fair, and they took them wives of all which they chose. Yahuwah said, my Ruach shall not always strive with man, for that he is also his flesh. Yet his days shall be 120 years. There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of Elohim came into the daughters of men, and they bare children to them, the same became mighty men, which were of old, men of renown. Elohim saw the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And it repented Yahuwah that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him at his heart. Now let's sit back and look at something, right? He said that he saw that the thoughts of man, the imagination, the plots, the plan, and devices of men were only evil continually. Now it's going into Noah, but we want to drop down to verse 12. Because he said he's going to destroy the earth, man, off the face, creeping things, fowls. Because he's like he said, it don't turn me from me to make. Look at what he said in verse 12. Elohim looked upon the earth, and behold, it was corrupt. For all flesh had corrupted his way upon the earth. Now let's look at corrupt. Let's see what we get for corrupt. Everybody has corrupted the way of Elohim on the earth at this time. That's why another reason why he told you in the end times, it would be as the days of Noah. And guess what the word is for corrupt? It's shakath, and it means to destroy. They have destroyed the way of Yahuwah upon the earth. Let's take a look at Luke 19 since I said that. They're destroying the way upon the Yahuwah upon the earth. From Luke 19, 2 Timothy chapter 3, I believe. So when you see him destroy them that destroy the earth, that's what he's referring to. It's not environmentally. They're destroying the way of Yahuwah upon the earth. As it tells you in Isaiah 24, they have changed the everlasting covenant. I guess we can grab that too since I mentioned it. Another reason why the nations are angry. Not only are they losing their power, but they're losing their ability to run amok and live how they want to live. Because at the end of the day, that's what most people want to do. They want to do what they want to do. Most people don't want their behavior restrained. That's why you see so much feminism and liberalism in the world, at least in the Western world, because if you bring quote unquote, what's the word I'm looking for? It's not original. It's not classic. Traditional. If you bring traditional gender roles and societal norms that once ruled at a particular time, you'll get fought against of being archaic and misogynistic and things of that nature. Of course, we know that the text tells us to return you to the ancient paths because people don't want to do that because it will remove their freedom. Remember what we read, he said we have freedom in the Mashal, but don't take that freedom as an opportunity to sin. If you notice, what does the world teach when it comes to the Lord is that, he died for your sins and pretty much you have freedom to do whatever. You know what I'm saying? So you have to understand that. I was listening to an individual mention certain stuff of what's written in the text as forth as how a woman supposed to look at her husband, and he literally omitted the fact that it says that submit to your husband as unto the Lord, not as you see him as some type of God, but giving him the same respect and reverence and honor that you would give to the Lord, because the Lord set him there as the head. The same way that he would want you to give the same reverence and honor to the priests or the prophets or the king, because he put them there. The same reason why he told you to give reverence and honor to your parents, because he put them there. So he wanted you to honor them like you would honor him. I don't see how that's hard to understand. Now, of course, why? Because men corrupt his way upon the earth. They destroy it. And they turn it into what they want it to be self-serving for their own lustful desires, whatever those may be. But nevertheless, you know what I'm saying? It shouldn't be a detestable thing for you to have that type of honor for your husband if you say you love the Lord. I told you the story before. A woman told me I never submitted no man. I told her, well, get ready to go to hell then. You know what I'm saying? And she was so stuck on that, talking about a natural man. Screw the actual man. You won't submit to the Lord. How you going to submit to somebody you've never seen, but you won't submit to someone who you have seen, who he instructed you to do that to? How can you say you're going to see the Lord and you dishonor your parents who you've seen? What makes you think you're going to honor him whom you've never seen? That doesn't even make any sense. The same way we were talking about this other day. How do you expect that if you don't even have a delight to please your husband, who you can see, how are you going to have a delight to please your husband who you can't see? That's why he makes these statements. It's why he gives you these scenarios. Like, if you can be in subjection to your parents, there's no way that you wouldn't be in subjection to Yahuwah. If you had a delight and a desire to see your parents pleased with your conduct and your behavior and your service towards them, if the transition to serving Yahuwah should be very smooth for you. But if you despise the authority of your parents and you didn't want them telling you what to do, and you were going to buck and you were going to do what you want to do, then you're going to do him the same way. Is it Luke 19? It wasn't Luke 19. My apologies, everyone, because it was Luke 18. It was Luke 18. We'll pick it up at verse 20. And that's just for perspective, for understanding. And we mentioned that stuff over the course of years. I just want you to be able to serve Yahuwah how you're supposed to. And the people and whatever areas that he tell us to be in subjection to, that if we can do that, then we shouldn't have no problem serving him. Because as we've read before, you're doing it to Elohim and not unto men. And that's where our problem come in at. Like, people like to read that verse, slaves, be obedient to your masters. That's not even what it translates to. Because people don't understand that the concept of employees and employer is in the law. And he was telling that employees not to disrespect their employer, but to obey them as if that employer was the Lord. He say even more so if that employer is a servant or a member of the household of the faith, to give them that respect so that his name is not blasphemed. But we so proud, arrogant, and stupid, you know what I'm saying, and selfish to the point that we don't care if Yahuwah's name is besmirched. Because all I care about is my flesh and my desires. And until we drop that line of thinking, then we can never be complete in the Lord. We'll never be where we desire to be because we thinking about ourselves, and I don't want to be in subjection. I want to do what I want to do. Nobody's going to say or do something that I don't like because you not looking at this person is, if the Lord put him there and set him up to have that authority. Well, I seen somebody post this yesterday about checking or rebuking a pastor, and the way that they described it, like the book tell you, you're not supposed to step to no pastor like no nigga in the street. And say you're supposed to treat him like a father. Say you ain't even supposed to bring no accusation against that man without 2-3 witnesses. There's a way that you do that. You don't go disrespect this man, and you wouldn't set this man to watch over people because you disrespecting him. But people feel like, oh, I'm gonna check my pastor. You out of order, you disrespectful, repugnant bastard. You know what I'm saying? That nigga wrong. It's a way to check him. But you can't check him like no nigga in the street. And why do you feel that way? Because you feel like you can go step in your daddy and try him like that. And when he punch you and knock all your teeth down your throat, you gonna think he wrong. Because you don't have no license to step to somebody who has authority or elder over you and go to them any kind of way. Even when they're in the wrong, it's a way you do things. See, we don't know that. You told, say what you feel. Do this and do that. That junk will get you sent to hell because it's not the godly way to do things. I'm talking about for us. Screw people who outside the house. They can do whatever they want to do. But we have rules inside our house. Your father has rules of how you conduct yourself in his house and how you interact with people in his house. There's certain things that we can and can't do. You have to understand that. That's why I've always told you, you can't bring the thought process of the world and bring that into the sanctuary of Yahuwah. You got to leave that stuff outside. Because the rules of the world are not the rules of the house of Yahuwah. And you cannot mix the two. That's how you get put out. Because you went around there to your neighbor's house and they mom and daddy let them do whatever. So you've been hanging around over there, so you think you can bring that home. Then you bring that home and you looking crazy because your daddy done slapped you upside the back of your head and your mama done kicked you in your butt. Now you mad because you're not understanding. Can't bring that in the house. This is a different set of rules. Nevertheless, Luke 17:20. And when he was demanded of the Pharisees when the kingdom of Elohim should come, he answered them and said, the kingdom of Elohim come not with observation. Neither shall they say, lo here or lo there. For behold, the kingdom of Elohim is within you. He said unto the disciples, the days will come when you shall desire to see the days of the Son of Man, and you shall not see it. Now listen to what he's telling you. Indeed it is. And amen. Indeed it is. Renewing of the mind is what it takes. Conversion, shoot, change your mind. But notice what he said. People are going to desire. Remember, I told you we're in a time of peace right now. It's not a time of war. You're going to desire to see the days when this man came for the forgiveness of sins and remission of sins. And you're not going to see it. Because it's going to be the day of his wrath. You're not going to see it. You have to understand that. You're going to desire to see that day. And that day is not going to be nowhere near in sight. That's why he tell you that in Revelation. Men will seek for death and it's going to flee from them. Nevertheless, they shall say to you, see here or see there, go not after them nor follow them. For if the lightning out of the one part under Shamahim shine into the other part under Shamahim, so shall also the Son of Man be in his day. But first he must suffer many things and be rejected of this generation. And as it was in the days of Noah, so shall it also be in the days of the Son of Man. They did eat, they drank, they married wives, they were given in marriage until the day that Noah entered into the ark and the flood came and destroyed them all. So they was out there destroying the earth. And they was reveling and they was doing their thing. And then it rained. And that's the same thing that you're going to see here. You're going to be eating, you're going to be drinking, you're going to be getting married, you're going to be given into marriage. And then the rain going to come. Because these people have been out here destroying the earth and corrupting the way of Yahuwah upon the earth. Let's get to Isaiah 24. So I'm going to get to Gog and Magog, y'all willing on the Shabbat, but not tonight. Not tonight. We got to set it up. I have to set it up and lean into it. 24:1. Listen to what he said these people out here doing. This is what he said they out here doing. Say, behold, Yahuwah make the earth empty, and he make it waste. He turn it upside down. He scatter abroad the inhabitants thereof. And it shall be as with the people, so with the priest. As with the servant, so with his master. As with the maid, so with the mistress. As with the buyer, so with the seller. As with the lender, so with the borrower. As with the taker of usury, so with the giver of usury to him. The land shall be utterly empty and utterly spoiled. For you who have spoken this word. The earth mourn and fade away. The world languish and fade away. The hardy people of the earth do languish. Well, let's look at language. He said they do languish. Hardy, if you didn't know, that's pride. That's proud people. And people hard proud against Yahuwah. Remember the book tell you that he'll bring plagues on these people and they still won't stop worshiping idols. The word for language here is amal. They're going to be weak. They're going to droop. They're going to grow feeble. Aleph meaning lamad. They're going to grow feeble. They're going to be exhausted. That goes back to the point that they're going to wail because of it. They're going to freeze up in their tracks because they had no idea that they thought it was a game. They thought it was a game. See, a lot of people think it's a game, and they can keep on thinking it's a game. Because just like Peter said, well, where's the sign of his coming? But the world can be continuing on since he flooded the earth the first time. The same heavens and that same earth been reserved and stored up under judgment for all the wicked on that last day. He just letting it be stored up. See, the iniquity ain't came to the full. And see, I mentioned that about destroying the earth. So we'll get that 2 Timothy chapter 3 in a second. But let's read this verse 5 of Isaiah 24. The earth also was defiled under the inhabitants thereof because they transgressed the laws, changed the ordinance, and broken the everlasting covenant. See, they're destroying his way upon the earth, and he ain't with it. That's what you got to understand. This stuff ain't just about, oh, the white man this, the white man that, or these people. All of them doing it. Your people included. That's why I'm talking about waking somebody up to know they're an Israelite is pure and utter buffoonery. As far as is concerned in heaven, that's buffoonery. Because you need to wake them up to Hamashiach so they can come up out of their sleep. See, everybody talking about you sleep, and every time they talking about sleep, they talking about knowing who you. That ain't no sleep, nigga. You ain't nothing but another woke nigga, a nigga who complains, rants, and rambles, but gives no one any information of which that will solve the problem of which they suffer from, which is death. Nevertheless, 2 Timothy chapter 3. I've been told you had to watch for a woke nigga, stupid nigga. And if you run across a woke woman, you better run, because 9 times out of 10, she ain't nothing but a whore. 2 Timothy 3:1. Then what it say, right? This know also that in the last days perilous times shall come. For men shall be lovers of their own selves, covetous, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful and unkadash. Look at the first thing. You're haughty, you're proud because you love yourself. You love yourself. Nevertheless, the next thing he said, then you're covetous and you boast and you're proud and you blaspheme and you don't thank Yahuwah for nothing. You're not set apart and you consistently disobey your parents. You're without natural affection. You're a truce breaker. You're a false accuser. You're incontinent. You're fierce and you're despisers of those that are good. Traitors, heady, high-minded, and this is the last one. Lovers of pleasure more than lovers of Elohim. And that is the problem for 99.9% of the people on this planet, that you love to please yourself before you love to please Elohim. And that's why I stated that if you don't even love to please your husband, how you going to love to please Elohim? Because you're looking to please yourself. And that's not the function that you were created for. Whether I'm talking about a natural woman or the daughter or the virgin daughter of Zion, meaning Yasharal as a whole, you weren't created to please yourself. You were created to please Elohim. The woman wasn't created to please herself. She was created to please her husband. So you see how those two things go into the mystery of Mashal and his bride. And when we understand that, then we can understand how we can actually get to the place that we say we want to be. But when we look at it as it's about me and pleasing myself, let's sit back and look at it, right? Mashal say anything that you ask in my Father's name, he'll do it. He said, I call you friends if you do whatsoever that I command you. How do you expect Yahuwah to move on your behalf when you don't delight to make sure that he's straight, that he's pleased? How do you expect him to move on your behalf? He's not going to move on your behalf. And then you know what ends up happening? The same thing that happens with the average woman in this society, because she's not concerned with pleasing her husband and that he's happy, he doesn't move on her behalf. And because he doesn't move on her behalf, she becomes to be resentful and angry because she's not doing the things that she would want him to do. But she's not concerned with him. So why would he do it? And that comes back to when we look at Yahuwah, our people as a whole. We're not concerned with pleasing him. We're not concerned with doing what he delights in. So then he ends up not doing the things for us that we want him to do. Then we end up becoming resentful towards him and mad with him. But in reality, the fault lies with us because we were not operating in the function that we were created to operate in. So we have to have that understanding to know that if you yield yourself to him, then he'll yield himself to you. If you think about him, then he's going to think about you. But if you only think about yourself and what you can get from him, then he is going to ignore you and you'll never get the full benefit that you desire because you were concerned with yourself, because you thought it was about honor and esteem to yourself and not honor and esteem to Yahuwah. Nevertheless, he say, having a form of godliness, but denying the power thereof, from such turn away. For of this sort are they which creep into houses and leave captive silly women, laden with sins, led away with diverse lusts. Because that's what men of this nature, these type of evil men, they looking for. Let's look at the word for silly in Greek over here. That's what they look for. They look for silly women who got different type of lusts because you're easily manipulated. You're easily manipulated when you got a multitude of lusts, because that's all the person has to, that's all they have to play to. Take you right on in bondage. That Greek word for silly women is gundakaron. It means a little woman used contemptuously, or i.e. a foolish woman. And if I recall correctly, I'm trying to remember the verse in Proverbs about well, you already know when we was looking at that a foolish woman plucks down her house. So, and we talk about that. So when you look at this foolish woman, she's plucking down her house, but it's another place where it tell you that this woman is clamorous and knoweth nothing. Give me a moment. Yeah, Proverbs 9 and 13. A foolish woman is clamorous and is simple, and she knows nothing. So that's where you see where Paul get that from, because he says ever learning and never able to come to the knowledge of the truth. Because this woman is plucking down or destroying her house. She's foolishly overthrowing it. And why is they overthrowing it? Because of the different lusts that you got within. And when we look at ourselves as a people and not focusing on the natural gender of a woman and know that we his woman, how do we foolishly pluck down our house? Because we were seeking our diverse lusts. That's why we killed a Mashal. That's why we overthrew that house. Because we're all of these, we traded, we high-minded, and we like to look godly. We like to pretend to be godly, but we get taken captive by the adversary. Because he said, he that commits sin is the servant of sin. You in bondage to it because of your diverse lust. So you steady studying, you steady learning, but you never come to the knowledge of a Mashal and everlasting life, and you perish. It's just the same difference. So don't just sit here and turn around and look at your wife and point a finger and this, that, and the third, because not only is it dealing with the natural, but when you take it dealing with the spiritual, he talking about you. He talking about you. Because when he talk about his body and being made up of his body and describing it as a woman, it still don't change the fact that it's a man and that you're the sheep of the pasture of his flock, being men, because you're joined to his body. So if you join to his body, then he talking about you as a man, because you conduct yourself in the same way towards him, because you don't care about pleasing him, and you don't care about him being delighted in your works, and you don't care about fulfilling the things that he told you to fulfill. So then when he don't move on your behalf, you mad with Yahuwah. And 99.9% of the time, that's why he gives you a woman who conducts herself in that same fashion. So you can see it for yourself, so that maybe you'll be disgusted at your own behavior when you see yourself and your spouse when she conducts herself in that fashion, because that's how you behave. The same way we done looked at that sometimes, and I'm not saying he do that to everybody, because he may not. Saying sometimes you see your children behave in a certain way because that's how you behave towards Yahuwah. So he wants you to see it. So not that you get disgusted and aggravated with your children, so you can see a reflection of yourself and be disgusted and aggravated with yourself. Nevertheless, Ezekiel 37. But that's if you're thinking a little higher than just what's in your face. Because Yahuwah's chastisement can come in many different ways. And if it's coming because he loves you. And he wants you to amend yourself and change your conduct, so that he can receive you into his hand, that you might, get that peaceable fruit of righteousness for being exercised thereby. Oh no, but I think Yahuwah willing, I think that's good for now. Yahuwah willing, we'll pick it up on the Shabbat. So praise be to the living Elohim in the name of Yahushua. We pick this up and swing more in the Gog and Magog and some of the things that I asked y'all to remember. So Yahuwah willing, we'll do that. I know we'll be on murder on the Shabbat, y'all willing. Bless everybody out the house of Yahuwah in the name of Yahushua. Now again, we mentioning these things for the consideration. I know it's easy to get caught on when we use natural examples, but don't get caught on the natural example. Get caught on the example which is pointing us to how we conducting ourselves in heaven. Don't just get locked in on the natural, because that's what some of y'all probably stumble at, because you get locked in on the natural. You really get locked in on the natural because it'll cause you to be able to skirt accountability for yourself. So you can say, see, these women be this, that, there, and the third. Don't be one of them niggas, man. Don't be one of them niggas, man. Understand that you his wife too, and you behave just like that woman behaves, just towards Yahuwah. You behave in the same fashion because you think in the same fashion, because you've been trained to think in that fashion by being taught by a whorish mother. That whorish mother being, quote unquote, the Babylonian thoughts process or Western civilization, however you want to look at it. Not only this here, now I'm talking about this here, and we probably delve into that a little bit more. Not only that, but with communist principles, because communism at its root and its core, upon deeper research, but Satanism. But that's another conversation for another day. Remember, right? It tells you that it said Babylon sit as a lady. I won't see any evil. Not that America itself is Babylon, but the Babylonian pagan mystery school system is running rampant throughout the whole earth. Oh, praise Yahuwah indeed. You know what I'm saying? It's running rampant throughout the whole earth.
And when you sit back and you look at it in that regard, you've been taught by a masculine, liberal woman. That's who's been raising you and nurturing you as a man. So that's why you think like a liberal, feminist woman towards your father, towards your husband. That's why you operate towards him in that fashion. Until you understand that, and that you have to break that shackle off of the fact that, you know what, I wasn't taught properly to be able to serve a man, i.e. Yahuwah, then you're going to conduct yourself like the very women that you say you don't like, the very women that you find to be repugnant. You're going to conduct yourself just like them. So you would be a hypocrite to actually speak against them for what they're doing, whether it be a random woman or your spouse, and you treating Yahuwah in the same fashion. Because remember, right? If we the sheep of his pasture today, if we hear his voice, and the pasture and the sheep of his flock are men. So that means it's imperative on the men to move and conduct themselves in a particular and proper fashion, a heavenly fashion, if you will, to be able to move to the process to correct that, not only for themselves and for the spouse and for the current generation of children, but if Yahuwah be merciful, for the generations of children that come after. But nevertheless, praise be to Yahuwah in the name of Yahushua. And again, I bless y'all at the house of Yahuwah in the name of Yahushua. Yahuwah willing, pick it up on the Shabbat and do it again.